Have you ever been betrayed so deeply that it shook the very foundation of who you are? Imagine planning the happiest day of your life, only to discover that the two people you trusted most had been secretly plotting your heartbreak. My name is Eva. For years, I believed I had built a love story worth celebrating. My fiancé, Daniel, was charming, supportive, and the kind of man who made strangers smile with his easy laugh. And then there was my best friend, Claire. We'd been inseparable since high school, late-night sleepovers, whispered secrets, and the kind of loyalty you think will last forever. So when Daniel slipped a sparkling ring onto my finger, Claire was the very first person I called. She screamed louder than I did, cried happy tears, and threw her arms around me like she had always dreamed of this moment too. Together, the three of us began planning the wedding. It was perfect, or at least I thought it was. The days leading up to the wedding were magical. My mom and sisters were helping me choose decorations, Daniel was taking care of the venue, and Claire had stepped into the role of maid of honor, like she was born for it. She managed the guest list, booked the photographer, even surprised me with a dress fitting at a boutique I couldn't have afforded on my own. She made me believe she was my second set of shoulders, carrying my stress, so I could just be a happy bride. But here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't announce itself. It hides in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to rip through your life like a storm you never saw coming. One evening, a week before the wedding, I was at Claire's apartment for what was supposed to be a girls-only sleepover. We ordered pizza, opened a bottle of sparkling cider, and spent hours reminiscing about our high school crushes and embarrassing college stories. I went to bed that night wrapped in the comfort of knowing I had the best friend anyone could ask for. What I didn't know is that when I drifted off to sleep, Claire slipped into the bathroom with her phone, texting the one person she should never have been speaking to, my fiancé. The truth was, Daniel and Claire had been seeing each other behind my back for months. While I was dreaming about wedding vows, they were trading secrets, stolen kisses, and late-night messages. And as I slept just a few feet away, they were making plans to destroy me on the one day I thought would be mine forever. But fate has a cruel way of revealing secrets. And it began with a sound. That night, I woke up suddenly, not because of a dream, but because of the faint, muffled sound of laughter coming from the bathroom. Claire's laugh. But there was something different in it, softer, almost intimate. Curious, I tiptoed closer. My stomach churned as I heard her whisper, "I can't wait until she finds out she's going to be crushed." I froze. My body turned cold. I wanted to push open the door, demand answers, but fear glued me in place. I crept back to bed, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would wake her. For the first time, a crack appeared in the perfect picture of my life. The next morning, Claire smiled at me like nothing had happened, serving pancakes and pouring coffee, as if she hadn't whispered betrayal into the night. But that whisper haunted me. I didn't know exactly what it meant yet, but deep down, I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. And so began the unraveling of my world. From that morning onward, every detail felt suspicious. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, but the memory of Claire's whisper wouldn't leave me alone. Daniel suddenly seemed distracted too. He was always busy with work or running last-minute errands for the wedding. When I'd ask him what he was doing, he'd kiss my forehead and say, "Just trust me, babe." Those words used to calm me. Now, they only deepened the pit in my stomach. Claire, meanwhile, became even more involved. Almost too involved. She insisted on handling the florist, the DJ, even my hair and makeup appointment. "Don't stress, Eva," she'd say with that wide, dazzling smile. "I've got everything under control." But sometimes I'd catch her glancing at me, just a little too long, her expression unreadable. It was like she was studying me, waiting for something. One evening, a few days before the wedding, I decided to surprise Daniel at his apartment. He had texted that he was working late, and I wanted to drop off some dinner, his favorite lasagna. I thought it would be a sweet gesture, something to remind him why he was marrying me. When I arrived, the building felt unusually quiet. His car was parked outside, which confused me. He wasn't supposed to be home. My hands shook as I carried the lasagna up the steps, balancing it carefully while fishing for a spare key. The moment I opened the door, my heart nearly stopped. There, on the coffee table, was a wine glass with lipstick on the rim. Not my shade. Not my brand. The faint sound of laughter came from the bedroom, followed by a hushed voice. Claire's voice. My chest tightened and my body went cold. I wanted to scream, to throw the lasagna against the wall, to storm into that bedroom and demand the truth. But something in me froze. Instead, I placed the dish quietly on the counter, turned around, and slipped out the door before anyone could hear me. I drove aimlessly through the city, my hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. Tears blurred the streetlights into glowing streaks. I couldn't believe what I had just heard and seen. My fiancé and my best friend together. By the time I pulled over at a quiet park, I could barely breathe. I sat there for hours, watching the empty swing sway in the night breeze, wondering how my life had turned into a nightmare. But as the shock faded, something else rose in its place. Anger. Burning, unrelenting anger. If they thought they could betray me and get away with it, they had underestimated the wrong woman. I wasn't going to confront them right away.
No.
That's what they would expect. Instead, I would wait. I would gather proof, piece by piece, until there was no way they could deny it. And then, I would take everything from them, the way they had tried to take everything from me. The game had changed. I was no longer the bride-to-be dreaming of her perfect day. I had become the hunter, and they had no idea. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a pounding head, but my resolve was sharper than ever. Betrayal had a way of cutting you open, but instead of bleeding out, I decided to sharpen my edges. Daniel texted me cheerfully, pretending everything was normal. "Good morning, love. Can't wait to see you later." The audacity made me laugh out loud, a bitter, hollow laugh that echoed through my empty kitchen. He had no idea that I knew. I spent that day carefully pretending too. I smiled when I had to, answered his calls sweetly, and even joked with Claire on the phone when she told me about some wedding detail. Every word from her mouth felt like poison, but I swallowed it down. Because now, my priority wasn't saving the wedding. It was preparing my revenge. First, I needed confirmation. Solid proof that Daniel and Claire were sneaking around. Catching them once wasn't enough. If I confronted them, they'd twist the story, make me sound crazy, maybe even gaslight me into doubting myself. But evidence? That would be undeniable. So I started paying attention. Every late night at the office, Daniel mentioned, I checked his location. I still had his iCloud synced to my phone, a habit from when we first got engaged. At first, it was innocent. We'd share locations to keep each other safe. Now, it became my weapon. That's how I noticed the pattern. He wasn't at work those nights. He was at Claire's apartment. Every single
time.
My stomach turned with each pin that dropped on the map, but at the same time, a strange calmness settled over me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. They were betraying me, and I had the digital breadcrumbs to prove it. One Friday night, I drove past Claire's building just to see for myself. The sight of Daniel's car parked right out front hit me like a punch. My hands shook on the steering wheel, but I forced myself not to cry. Not anymore. Instead, I snapped a picture, license plate, building sign, timestamp. Evidence. But I didn't stop there. I started recording calls, saving texts, even noting down exact times Daniel claimed to be busy. The more I gathered, the stronger I felt. It was like weaving a web around them, strand by strand. They thought I was oblivious, but I was watching their every move. At night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd imagine the moment of their downfall. The look on Claire's perfect face when her lies unraveled. The shock in Daniel's eyes when he realized the woman he thought was weak had been 10 steps ahead of him all along. That fantasy became my lullaby, the only thing that soothed me. And the best part? Neither of them suspected a thing. Daniel still kissed me goodbye, still told me how much he loved me. Claire still called me bestie and sent me memes late at night. Every fake smile, every dishonest word, was just more fuel for the fire building inside me. I wasn't going to rush. No, I was going to savor this. Because revenge, I realized, isn't about the confrontation. It's about the reveal. It's about letting them trap themselves so completely that, by the time the mask is ripped off, there's no escape. They wanted to play games? Fine. I was done being the pawn. From now on, I was the one moving the pieces. The deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. Daniel and Claire weren't just having a fling. They were building a secret relationship right under my nose. And the sickest part? They were using my wedding as the perfect cover. Claire still texted me daily about flower arrangements, bridesmaid dress fittings, and guest lists. Her messages were sprinkled with emojis and love you, bestie, like nothing was wrong. But now, every word was a dagger. Because the very night she'd gush about helping me pick my veil, she'd be tangled up in bed with my fiancé. I started archiving everything. Screen recordings of Daniel's location history. Screenshots of his lies. Texts where he told me he was working late, perfectly lined up with maps, showing his car parked at Claire's. My notes app became a war journal, filled with dates, times, and proof. But something inside me shifted. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't even angry all the time. I was cold, focused, like a hunter watching prey that had no idea it was being tracked. To the outside world, I played my role flawlessly. I laughed at Daniel's jokes. I complimented Claire's selflessness. I even sent them both photos of wedding invitations I was designing. They thought I was wrapped up in bridal bliss. Meanwhile, I was planning the takedown. One night, Daniel came home smelling faintly of Claire's perfume. I recognized it instantly. Vanilla and jasmine, the same bottle she'd bragged about buying in Paris. He tried to kiss me, but I pulled back just enough to let him think I was tired. I smiled sweetly, all the while fighting the urge to vomit. That night, I drafted my ultimate plan. It wasn't enough to simply expose them.
No.
If I just confronted them, they'd apologize, cry, beg forgiveness, and maybe even try to spin it against me. I didn't want apologies. I wanted devastation. I wanted to rip the masks off in front of everyone. The wedding had to become the stage. Think about it, both families gathered, friends, co-workers, distant relatives. Everyone who believed in the fairy tale Daniel and I had spun. What better place to burn that fairy tale to ashes than right at the altar? I pictured it clearly. The music playing, Claire standing beside me in her bridesmaid's gown, Daniel looking smug in his tux. And then, boom, the truth exploding in front of everyone. No chance to hide. No time to spin. Just raw exposure. I didn't want a private revenge. I wanted a public unmasking. So, I refined my collection of evidence. Photos, texts, call logs, even the video I secretly took of Daniel's car outside Claire's building. I organized them neatly into a digital folder labeled Wedding Gift. And then I went one step further. I printed some of it. Hard copies of texts and photos slipped into envelopes. Because if technology failed me, I wasn't about to lose my chance. Each piece of proof I gathered wasn't just evidence, it was power. It gave me strength to smile at Claire's face without flinching. It gave me patience when Daniel hugged me and whispered forever. And most of all, it gave me the resolve to wait. Waiting was the hardest part. But the reveal? The reveal would be worth every second. The days crawled by, but instead of dreading the wedding, I began to look forward to it. Not for the vows, not for the happily ever after, but for the storm I was preparing to unleash. Daniel was oblivious. He strutted around like the perfect groom, charming my parents, cracking jokes with the groomsmen, sending sweet texts during the day. Claire was worse. She doubled down on her best friend of the bride act, always offering to help with decorations, insisting on handling last-minute details, even crying fake tears over how happy she was for me. It was theater, a grotesque performance. But what they didn't realize was that I had written the script for the final act. I booked the videographer for extended coverage of the wedding ceremony. I wanted multiple cameras rolling, capturing every second. Because when the reveal came, I wanted no angle left untouched. Meanwhile, I slipped envelopes into my purse, each one holding printed screenshots of texts, photos, and proof of their little love story. I addressed some to key people, my parents, his parents, a couple of our closest friends. People whose opinions would cut the deepest when the truth hit. I didn't need violence. I didn't need screaming matches. I needed silence. That awful, pin-drop silence when truth sucks the air out of a room. The morning of the wedding, I looked at myself in the mirror. I wore the dress I had once chosen for love, but now it felt like armor. I wasn't a bride anymore. I was executioner, jury, and judge. Daniel beamed when he saw me before the ceremony, whispering, "You look like an angel." I smiled, thinking, yes, an angel of ruin. When I walked down the aisle, every eye was on me. The music swelled, my heart pounded, but not with nerves. This was adrenaline. I wasn't walking toward Daniel. I was walking toward justice. The vows began. His voice was steady, smug even, like he thought he'd won. When it was my turn, I glanced at Claire, standing proudly as my maid of honor. She was glowing with fake devotion, as if she weren't secretly sharing the bed of the man waiting for me at the altar. And that's when I paused. I looked around the room, at the sea of smiling faces, the ones who believed in our love story. Then I reached for the microphone. Before I say my vows, I began, my voice trembling just enough to pass as emotion. I think it's important that all of you know the truth about the two people standing closest to me today. The room shifted. A murmur rippled through the guests. Claire's smile faltered. Daniel's hand twitched. I pulled out my phone, connected to the projector we'd set up for the reception slideshow, and tapped the screen. The first image appeared. A screenshot. Daniel's words to Claire, "I can't wait to see you tonight. She thinks I'm stuck at the office again. God, I love you." Gasps filled the room. Slide 2. A photo of Daniel's car parked outside Claire's building, time-stamped. Slide 3. Claire's reply, with heart emojis and a promise to be quiet so she doesn't suspect. By the fourth slide, the silence was suffocating. Some people covered their mouths. Others shook their heads. Claire went pale. Daniel's face turned crimson. And I just stood there.
Calm.
Steady. The perfect bride, delivering the perfect ruin. I thought, I said softly into the mic, that a marriage should start with honesty. So here's ours. The room erupted. The room was chaos. Gasps turned into whispers, whispers into shouts. Some of the guests stood up, others craned their necks, everyone desperate to process what they were seeing. Daniel froze at the altar, his smug smile gone. He opened his mouth, closed it again, like a fish gasping for air. Claire took a step forward, her face as pale as the flowers in her bouquet, her hands trembling. "Eva, this isn't," Daniel stammered, reaching for me. I stepped back, holding the microphone tighter. Don't lie to me here.
Not now.
Not in front of everyone who trusted you." Gasps again. All eyes locked on us. My parents looked shattered, his parents horrified. The maid of honor, the supposed best friend, was visibly shaking, as if the ground beneath her heels had given way. I let the silence sit, let it grow heavier. Then I turned back to the crowd. This wasn't just an affair. This was betrayal, plotted right under my nose, while she stood beside me, smiling, pretending to be loyal, and he'd pretending to love me. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Unbelievable." Claire finally snapped. "It wasn't like that," she cried, her voice shrill and cracking. "You don't understand, Daniel and I." But I cut her off. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You betrayed me, Claire. You betrayed our friendship, our sisterhood. You were supposed to be my maid of honor, my confidant, and instead you chose to crawl into his bed."
Gasps again.
A woman in the front row covered her mouth. One of the groomsmen muttered, "Damn." Daniel tried to salvage his dignity, stepping toward me, his voice low, pleading. "Eva, please, we can talk about this. Just not here. Not like this." That was when I looked him dead in the eyes, my voice steady. "No, Daniel. Exactly here. Exactly like this. Because if you are bold enough to cheat in secret, then I am bold enough to expose you in public." The audience erupted again. People turned in their seats, whispering fiercely, some glaring at Daniel, others glaring at Claire. His own mother looked like she might faint. Then, to make sure no one could dismiss this as a mistake, I pulled another envelope from under the podium. If you think this is fabricated, please ask anyone here. I've given copies of the evidence to our families and closest friends. This isn't a slideshow. This is the truth. You could feel the walls closing in on him. Daniel's bravado cracked. He wiped at his face, muttering, "Oh my God." Claire looked around helplessly, but no one reached for her. She was alone, just like him. I took a long breath and handed the microphone back to the officiant. Then I turned to Daniel and whispered, just loud enough for the front row to hear, "You should have thought about this before you ruined us." And with that, I lifted the skirt of my dress and walked straight down the aisle. Alone. Head high. Each step echoing like a drumbeat of finality. Behind me, I heard voices shouting, people demanding answers, the perfect soundtrack to the collapse of their secret world. I didn't look back. Not once. Because this wasn't my ending. It was theirs. When I stepped outside the church, the cool air hit me like a slap, sharp and cleansing. For a moment, I just stood there, clutching the edge of my gown, breathing in freedom. The weight of the lies I had been carrying was gone, ripped off my shoulders in front of everyone. But inside the hall, chaos brewed. I could hear raised voices, the scrape of chairs, the booming echo of Daniel trying and failing to control the narrative. I didn't need to see it to know. His carefully crafted image had crumbled like a house of cards in a storm. By the time I reached the steps, guests were already trickling out. Some avoided me, their eyes wide with shock, while others stopped to whisper encouragement, as if I had done what they always wish someone would do. Speak the truth, no matter how ugly. One woman squeezed my hand and murmured, "You're braver than most brides would ever be." Braver? Maybe. Or maybe just done being anyone's fool. News spreads fast in the age of smartphones. By the time I reached the parking lot, I caught the glow of screens everywhere. People were texting, calling, recording. Within hours, my story wasn't just a scandal whispered in pews. It was an explosion across social media. Hashtags started popping up. Hashtag runaway bride, hashtag truth at the altar, and even hashtag Daniel the deceiver. Posts with my name, screenshots of the photos I revealed, and snippets of video captured during the ceremony went viral. Strangers I'd never met were weighing in, calling me an icon, a hero, a woman who stood up for herself. Others were debating in comment sections, wondering how I had gathered the courage to humiliate them so publicly. But the best part? I didn't have to defend myself anymore. The truth was out there. Raw, undeniable, backed by receipts. Daniel, on the other hand, couldn't run fast enough. Within a day, he deleted his social media accounts. Mutual friends told me his office had become unbearable, clients dropping him, colleagues whispering behind his back. His reputation, polished for years, was tarnished overnight. And Claire? Let's just say maid of honor became the most ironic title in history. She was shunned by nearly everyone. Friends cut her off, her workplace turned icy, and even her own family issued a statement condemning her choices. Her tears, once reserved for her betrayal, were now spent on the loneliness that betrayal had earned her. As for me, people expected me to hide, to crumble in embarrassment. But I did the opposite. I went out. I smiled. I lived. Every time someone recognized me at a cafe or grocery store, they'd whisper, "That's the girl who exposed them." Not with pity, no. With admiration. And slowly, I realized something profound. Sometimes revenge isn't fire and fury. Sometimes it's simply telling the truth so loudly, so unapologetically, that it destroys the liars all by itself. My truth had done exactly that. The room was chaos. Gasps turned into whispers, whispers into shouts. Some of the guests stood up, others craned their necks, everyone desperate to process what they were seeing. Daniel froze at the altar, his smug smile gone. He opened his mouth, closed it again, like a fish gasping for air. Claire took a step forward, her face as pale as the flowers in her bouquet, her hands trembling. Eva, this isn't. Daniel stammered, reaching for me. I stepped back, holding the microphone tighter. Don't lie to me here.
Not now.
Not in front of everyone who trusted you.
Gasps again.
All eyes locked on us. My parents looked shattered, his parents horrified. The maid of honor, the supposed best friend, was visibly shaking, as if the ground beneath her heels had given way. I let the silence sit, let it grow heavier. Then I turned back to the crowd. This wasn't just an affair. This was betrayal, plotted right under my nose, while she stood beside me, smiling, pretending to be loyal, and he's pretending to love me. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Unbelievable." Claire finally snapped. "It wasn't like that," she cried, her voice shrill and cracking. "You don't understand, Daniel and I." But I cut her off. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You betrayed me, Claire. You betrayed our friendship, our sisterhood. You were supposed to be my maid of honor, my confidant, and instead you chose to crawl into his bed."
Gasps again.
A woman in the front row covered her mouth. One of the groomsmen muttered, "Damn." Daniel tried to salvage his dignity, stepping toward me, his voice low, pleading. "Eva, please, we can talk about this. Just not here. Not like this." That was when I looked him dead in the eyes, my voice steady. "No, Daniel. Exactly here. Exactly like this. Because if you are bold enough to cheat in secret, then I am bold enough to expose you in public." The audience erupted again. People turned in their seats, whispering fiercely, some glaring at Daniel, others glaring at Claire. His own mother looked like she might faint. Then, to make sure no one could dismiss this as a mistake, I pulled another envelope from under the podium. "If you think this is fabricated, please ask anyone here. I've given copies of the evidence to our families and closest friends. This isn't a slideshow. This is the truth." You could feel the walls closing in on him. Daniel's bravado cracked. He wiped at his face, muttering, "Oh my God." Claire looked around helplessly, but no one reached for her. She was alone, just like him. I took a long breath and handed the microphone back to the officiant. Then I turned to Daniel and whispered, just loud enough for the front row to hear, "You should have thought about this before you ruined us." And with that, I lifted the skirt of my dress and walked straight down the aisle. Alone, head high, each step echoing like a drumbeat of finality. Behind me, I heard voices shouting, people demanding answers, the perfect soundtrack to the collapse of their secret world. I didn't look back. Not once. Because this wasn't my ending. It was theirs. When people ask me now, "Would you do it all over again?" my answer surprises them. Because yes, I would. Not because I enjoyed the heartbreak, or because betrayal feels like some kind of rite of passage, but because without that brutal unraveling at the altar, I wouldn't have discovered my own strength. Sometimes life tears you apart just to show you what you're made of. The first lesson I learned was this: listen to your instincts. Looking back, there were signs. The late nights Daniel couldn't explain. The way Claire would avoid eye contact around me. The whispers I brushed off as paranoia. I silenced my own gut because I wanted the fairy tale so badly. Never again. Instincts are your compass. They'll scream the truth long before the evidence shows up. The second lesson? Don't be afraid to walk away. Society tells us to endure, to patch up broken things, to stay for the sake of appearances. But sometimes, walking away is the bravest and healthiest decision. I could have gone through with the wedding, smiled for the photos, lived a lie. Instead, I chose honesty over humiliation. Yes, the public exposure stung. But the relief of freedom? Worth every whisper. And then there's the third lesson. Revenge is not destruction. It's transformation. If I had spent all my energy plotting how to ruin Daniel and Claire, I would still be tied to them, chained to their story. But by channeling my pain into growth, I made them irrelevant. My life became the stage, not their betrayal. That's the most powerful revenge of all, thriving where they expected you to crumble. I won't pretend it was easy. Nights of doubt still came. Sometimes I stared at the ceiling, wondering if people would always know me as the bride who ran. but over time, that label shifted. They didn't see me as weak. They saw me as fearless. And here's the quiet truth. For every person who betrayed you, there are 10 more who admire you, who learn from your courage, who silently thank you for surviving. If you've ever been cheated, lied to, abandoned, I want you to know something. You're not defined by their choices. You're defined by what you do next. The pain will try to write your story for you, but you hold the pen. And when you take it back, when you carve your own path, the ending is yours to decide. Daniel once told me that I was too dramatic, that I made mountains out of molehills. But maybe the real problem was that he underestimated the mountain inside me. Betrayal didn't break me. It built me. So yes, I would do it again. Not for the suffering, but for the strength it awakened. And if my story teaches even one person to choose truth, to choose themselves, then every scar has been worth it. And so, this is where my story lands, not in the ruins of what almost was, but in the foundation of what I've built since. If you've stayed with me this far, you've walked through my heartbreak, my anger, my revenge, and my healing. You've seen the girl who once believed love could never betray her, and the woman who rose when that belief was shattered. What I've learned is simple but unshakable. Pain does not get the final say. We do. There was a time I thought revenge meant making Daniel and Claire pay, publicly, loudly, dramatically. But true revenge is quieter, steadier. It's in the mornings I wake up without regret. It's in the nights I sleep peacefully, knowing I chose my dignity over someone else's deceit. It's in the small victories, smiling again, loving again, trusting myself again. Do I still think of them? Of course. Betrayal leaves fingerprints. But those marks don't hurt anymore. They remind me of who I am and what I deserve. And honestly, they should remind them of what they lost. To everyone listening, maybe you're sitting in your car or lying awake in bed or scrolling because your heart feels heavy. This is for you. Whatever betrayal you've faced, whatever heartbreak, it does not define you. You are not just the victim of someone else's choices. You are the author of your next chapter. Choose yourself.
Choose peace.
Choose growth. If you've been cheated on, know this. You are not unlovable. If you've been lied to, know this. You are not naive. If you've been left behind, know this. You are not disposable. Their actions do not determine your worth. I'm not telling this story because I want pity. I'm telling it because maybe you, like me, need a reminder that survival is beautiful. That revenge isn't just sweet. It's liberating. That walking away can be the loudest victory of all. So if you're listening right now and your chest feels tight because this sounds too much like your life, let me be the voice that says, it gets better. You will laugh again. You will trust again. And when you look back, you'll see not the ruins of betrayal, but the unshakable strength it gave you. Daniel and Claire? They're a closed book. But me? I'm still writing. And if my story reaches you, if it makes you feel less alone, then I've won more than revenge. I've found purpose. This was my truth. Thank you for hearing it. Now it's your turn. Share yours. Somewhere out there, someone needs your story too.